We are at the beach. Don't ruin our vacation. Mother-in-law. The voice on the phone said, accompanied by the sound of crashing waves and laughter, before the line went dead with a sharp beep. I am Roseanne. I am 72 years old, and my entire life was dedicated to appraising real estate and calculating the true risk of investments. What my daughter-in-law forgot to calculate that afternoon was who the legitimate owner of the sand she was standing on actually was today. The ocean breeze flows through the large floor-to-ceiling windows of this very house on the coast. I pour my chamomile tea with the deliberate slowness that my age allows, listening to the constant crash of salt water against the rocks of the breakwater. The afternoon sun paints the living room walls in a warm, golden hue, an absolute contrast to the sterile, cold memory that visits me today. Everything is in its exact place. The wicker chairs on the terrace, the heavy oak dining table, the immaculate glass separating me from the balcony. The silence that surrounds me is my most faithful companion, but it is a chosen silence. A silence that smells of absolute peace and not of forced abandonment. To reach this tranquility, to recover the sovereignty over my own space and my own life, I had to walk through a silent storm that did not unleash in the open sky, but between the four walls of a small, aseptic room at Central General Hospital exactly 1 year ago. There, hooked up to wires and monitors, I learned in the most brutal way that the true value of people is not measured by decades of coexistence or blood ties, but by what they decide to do when you become a temporary inconvenience to their leisure plans. It had all begun early on a Tuesday morning in the oppressive silence of my old house in the city. The pain in my chest wasn't a sudden, cinematic heart attack, but a constant, dull pressure, as if someone had placed a concrete slab directly over my ribs. As a woman of numbers, facts, and tangible evidence, I didn't panic or let myself get carried away by hysteria. I got out of bed very slowly, calculating every movement. I checked the pulse at my wrist and knew, with clinical certainty, that I needed immediate medical assistance. I went to my closet, took out a small, dark duffel bag that I always kept packed for emergencies, and verified its contents. My ID, my private health insurance card, a printed list of my allergies, and a couple of changes of comfortable clothes. I dialed 911 myself. I gave precise directions without a tremor in my voice, so the ambulance would arrive right at my door, and I sat on the living room couch to wait, leaving the porch light on to guide the paramedics. I didn't call my son Matthew in that critical moment. It was the middle of the night. He lived on the other side of the city with his wife, Chloe, and my grandson, Nicholas. My logic dictated that there was absolutely no need to alarm them in the middle of the night when I could manage my own hospital admission without intermediaries. That was my first great mistake, believing that logic operated within family bonds with the same mathematical precision as it did in the real estate contracts I used to draft when I was wheeled through the automatic doors of the ER. The medical staff acted with admirable speed. They subjected me to an endless series of procedures that blurred the hour's cold EKGs on my skin. Blood draws. Repetitive questions about my medical history. The conclusion at dawn was that I had suffered a minor cardiac event to a severe case of angina pectoris, a serious warning from my own body that required strict observation for at least 72 hours. They settled me into room 402. A square space, painted in a white that hurt the retinas, equipped with an adjustable bed and monitors that blinked, emitting rhythmic beeps that would set the tempo for my upcoming days. Once I was hooked up to an IV and the attending cardiologist assured me that my condition was stable but required absolute bed rest. I asked an orderly to hand me my cell phone from my bag. It was 8:00 a.m. on Wednesday, a perfectly reasonable hour to make the call that would set the family support network in motion. I dialed Matthew's number. The phone rang 7 times in my ear, until his impersonal voicemail recording picked up. I didn't leave a voice message. I figured he might be driving to the office or dropping Nicholas off at school. I tried calling again at noon, during my first tasteless hospital meal, and the result was exactly the same. Throughout the rest of that first day of hospitalization, my phone screen remained dark. No notifications. No returned calls. Not the slightest trace of concern. The automatic justification that every mother builds over the years activated in my mind like a well-oiled defense mechanism. He was very busy. Surely he had an important board meeting. Maybe he had left his phone on silent on his desk. As a professional appraiser, I've always known that when a building shows visible cracks in the facade's paint, the real problem is usually hidden deep within the foundation. Matthew had been showing small cracks in his attention toward me for years, but I had systematically refused to inspect the structural base of our relationship, preferring to ignore the damage to keep the facade intact. The second day in the hospital was a supreme exercise in mental endurance and dignity. The clinical routine is, by nature, dehumanizing. They wake you up at ungodly hours in the morning to measure your blood pressure. They change your IVs with professional indifference. They serve you plastic trays with unsalted mashed potatoes and fluorescent-colored gelatin. However, the hardest thing to endure wasn't the physical discomfort of the bed, nor the residual pain in my chest, but the pitying looks from the floor staff, the nurses, with their intuition sharpened by years of observing family dynamics during crises, began asking the inevitable questions I dreaded answering. Is anyone from your family coming to see you today? Mrs. Newman asked a young nurse as she adjusted the IV drip in my left arm. Glancing discreetly at the empty visitor chairs, my son is out of town on unavoidable business matters. I lied in an even voice, maintaining eye contact without a flinch. It wasn't shame burning in my stomach, but a primal instinct for preservation. I was not willing to become the object of pity in the cardiology ward that same afternoon, seeing that Matthew still hadn't shown any signs of life. I decided to change my strategy and call Chloe, my daughter-in-law, if my son was genuinely unreachable. She, as his wife, I would surely answer, or at least return my call upon seeing my name on the screen. I dialed her number, but the call was actively rejected on the second ring. An automated text message arrived on my phone moments later. Times can't talk right now. Send a message. I typed a brief, clear text. Stripped of any emotional drama times, I have been admitted to the ER at Central General Hospital since yesterday. I had a serious cardiac problem. I need Matthew to contact me urgently as soon as possible. The message was marked with double blue read receipts a few minutes later. I waited. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. The sun hid behind the large gray buildings that blocked the view from my window, and the sepulchral silence of my phone became deafening, confirming my worst suspicions. During that second night, unable to sleep due to the constant noise of the hallway monitors and the unforgiving hardness of the orthopedic mattress, my methodical mind began to organize the data of my life. Archiving memories and evaluating my family's history, I remembered my late husband, Jack. He was a tirelessly hard-working man, a businessman who built his company from scratch and managed to secure a solid net worth through early mornings and sacrifices. I, for my part, spent my days evaluating third-party properties, calculating the depreciation of commercial real estate, reviewing architectural blueprints, and analyzing legal deeds. Together, we formed an unbeatable partnership when we finally bought the house on the coast, in the exclusive, private, gated community. Ocean Ridge Estates. It wasn't an impulsive luxury or a whim. It was a meticulously calculated investment to ensure our peace of mind in our old age. We wanted an oceanfront sanctuary, a secure place with strict surveillance and restricted access, where time would pass at our own pace. But Jack passed away suddenly 7 years ago. His absence left an immense void in the house, which Matthew attempted to fill almost immediately, not by assuming responsibilities, but by demanding rights and privileges. Matthew had grown up surrounded by all the comforts that Jack and I never had in our youth. We paid his tuition at the best universities, bought him his first brand-new car off the lot, and handed him the entire down payment for his own upscale apartment in a chic neighborhood when he decided to marry Chloe. She, on the other hand, was a woman who deeply appreciated the results of other people's efforts without having the slightest intention of contributing to the process. From the very beginning, I noticed her natural inclination for comfort without cost. I didn't judge her immediately. I thought that, coming from a different background, she would eventually understand the value of the hard work that sustained our standard of living. However, the passing years only served to confirm my initial observations with painful precision. For my son and daughter-in-law, my existence gradually became an uninterrupted financial and logistical assistance service, a compulsory trust fund. If they needed a substantial loan they never intended to repay, I was there with an open checkbook. If they wanted me to watch my grandson Nicholas for an entire weekend so they could attend parties or take weekend getaways, I cancelled my plans and was there. And when summer vacations or long holiday weekends arrived, my property at times, Ocean Ridge Times, became their default destination by divine right. I religiously took care of paying the steep annual HOA maintenance fees, the extraordinary condo assessments, the property taxes, the hurricane insurance, and all necessary repairs. They simply arrived in their SUV. They demanded that the pool water be at the perfect temperature, that the pantry be overflowing with imported products, and that the bathroom towels be thick and brand new. I allowed it all in silence. I allowed it because, in my naivety as a widowed mother, I believed it was the only way to keep the family united after Jack's devastating loss. I tragically underestimated the emotional cost of my own complacency. I thought I was buying filial love and presence, when in reality, I was funding my own invisibility and guaranteeing their lack of respect. The dawn of the third day of my hospitalization brought with it an unsettling, definitive clarity. The attending specialist entered my room with my chart under his arm and informed me that, fortunately, my clinical progress was highly favorable. However, he was categorical in explaining that my medical discharge would depend exclusively on a direct family member, with showing up physically to escort me home and taking responsibility for my care during the first few days of recovery. According to his strict orders, I could not drive under any circumstances. I could not lift heavy objects, and I could not remain alone in my home due to the latent risk of a sudden relapse. We need the full details of your responsible family member, Mrs. Newman, the doctor said, jotting something down on his clipboard with a black pen. Someone has to sign the legal discharge papers tomorrow morning at the main reception. It's hospital protocol. I nodded in silence. Without blinking, reality descended upon me like a solid, heavy block of ice on my chest. Much more painful than the cardiac tightness that had brought me there. First, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand with a hand that no longer trembled. This time, there would be no ignored text messages. There would be no fabricated excuses about last-minute corporate meetings. More than 48 full hours had passed since I explicitly informed my daughter-in-law about my critical health status. They had read the message. They knew exactly where I was and what was happening to me. I sat on the edge of the mechanical bed, letting my legs dangle toward the linoleum floor, the hospital gown thin, faded, and worn out by hundreds of industrial washes, gave me a look of physical vulnerability that I deeply detested. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with filtered hospital air, and channeled the exact same absolute concentration I used in my active days when I had to sit across from an arrogant client to inform him, documents in hand, that his property was worth exactly half of what he intended to charge. I dialed Matthew's number one more time, ready to exhaust the very last resort. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times, and to my absolute surprise, someone picked up on the other end. It wasn't my son's voice that answered. It was Chloe, immediately. A fraction of a second. Before she uttered a single syllable, the background noise hit me through the receiver with overwhelming clarity. It was an unmistakable environment to my ears. The constant, rhythmic roar of the ocean crashing on the shore, the sharp squawking of seagulls fighting over food, the metallic clinking of silverware against thick ceramic plates, and soft, tropical music playing from a high-fidelity speaker system. They were sitting at the exclusive beach club restaurant. They were in my territory, or at least on the private premises of the gated community they only had access to because of me. "Hello," Chloe said. Her tone didn't denote the slightest concern, not even a feigned courtesy. It was a tone of obvious and deep annoyance, the exact same vocal inflection one would use to dismiss an overly persistent telemarketer during lunch. "Chloe, it's me," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, measuring every syllable with mathematical coldness. "I have been admitted to the cardiology unit at Central General Hospital for 3 days. I sent you a clear message on Tuesday. I need Matthew to come immediately. The doctor is discharging me tomorrow morning, and the protocol requires the physical signature of a responsible family member to let me leave." There was a pause on the other end of the line. In that brief void of words, I clearly heard Matthew's voice roaring with laughter at something in the background, followed by the high-pitched voice of my grandson, Nick, demanding they buy him another chocolate ice cream. The mental image that formed in my head was absolutely sharp, precise, and devastating. They were enjoying the radiant sun, the sea breeze, the expensive food. Exactly a 3-hour freeway drive away from the gray building where I was hooked up to an IV. "Oh, mother-in-law, please," Chloe sighed, dragging out her vowels with a theatrical, condescending exasperation. "We read your little message." "Yes, but Matthew told me it was surely just you exaggerating to get attention. You know how you get sometimes with your old-age ailments. It is not an ailment or an exaggeration. It is a documented cardiac event. I need real assistance to get out of here. Look, Roseanne." She used my first name intentionally, marking her territory, attempting to establish her supposed authority over the situation. "We are at the beach. We planned this trip weeks ago, and it was hard to organize. The kids are having an incredible time at the club pool, and Matthew needed to relax from the stress of the city. You cannot possibly expect us to drop everything here, pack up, drive 3 hours back in traffic, and lose our remaining sunny days just because you need someone to sign a simple piece of paper at reception. Pay a private nurse to do the paperwork for you. You have more than enough money for that, and then some. Are you telling me definitively that you are not coming for me? I asked. There was not an ounce of begging in my tone, nor a drop of self-pity. It was simply an imperative need to establish the facts verbally and irrefutably for the record of my own conscience. I am telling you we are at the beach. Don't ruin our vacation. Mother-in-law, she replied. Blunt, cutting, and final. She didn't wait to hear my response. The line died instantly with an electronic click, followed by the dull, repetitive tone indicating that the connection had been severed from her end. I kept the phone pressed to my ear for several more seconds, actively listening to that electronic nothingness. The sterile silence of my hospital room contrasted violently with the carefree, tropical clamor that had just poured through the receiver. I lowered my arm with calculated slowness and placed the phone on the cold surface of the metal nightstand. Any other woman of my generation would have burst into inconsolable tears at that moment. She would have called her neighbors or lifelong friends to complain bitterly. She would have cursed the heavens for the cruelty and ingratitude of modern children. She would have felt the ground open up beneath her feet to swallow her whole. But I am, and have always been, a deeply methodical woman. My brain does not process betrayal through an immediate torrent of tears, but through an exhaustive analysis of the new structure of reality. In that exact instant, facing that metal table, the conceptual structure of my family collapsed completely, pulverizing down to the foundation. But I wasn't trapped under the rubble crying for help. I simply took a step back in my mind and observed the ruins with the coldness of a forensic inspector. Evaluating total losses, Chloe had said, "We are at the beach." But they weren't just any public beach. I knew the exact coordinates of the ground they were standing on. Just a week ago, Matthew had swung by my city house without even sitting down for a cup of coffee, exclusively to pick up the spare magnetic key cards for my property at times. Ocean Ridge, he had told me, with his rehearsed good boy smile, that they wanted to take advantage of the long holiday weekend so Nicholas could breathe some fresh air. I had handed him the keychain with no questions asked, even making sure that very afternoon to transfer additional funds into the HOA account so my family would have unlimited access to the private club's premium facilities, the a la carte restaurants, the cabana towel service, the tennis courts, and the golf course. They were there right at that exact second, sleeping peacefully on the mattresses I had selected and paid for, showering with the hot water I funded month after month, and demanding privileges in a residential complex whose strict security depended on an owner registry that bore only my name. The deep indignation that sparked in my chest didn't make me tremble with weakness. On the contrary, it stabilized me completely. I glanced at the monitor beside me. The green trace of my heart rate remained steady, perhaps even firmer and more regular than in the previous 2 days. The thick fog of confusion and maternal sadness had disappeared without a trace, instantly replaced by an absolute, cutting clarity. They had made a conscious decision based exclusively on their own selfish comfort. They had assumed with monumental arrogance that my tolerance was infinite. They had taken for granted that the incessant flow of financial and logistical benefits I provided them was an acquired right by birth or marriage, an inexhaustible natural resource that required absolutely no maintenance, gratitude, or reciprocity. I got out of bed in one swift motion. This time I felt no dizziness, no weakness in my knees. I walked with firm steps toward the room's small bathroom. I turned on the faucet, thoroughly washed my face with ice-cold water, and stared at myself in the fluorescent mirror. The face looking back at me was that of a 72-year-old woman, undeniably marked by time, with deep wrinkles around the eyes and messy silver hair. But it was definitively not the face of a victim willing to be discarded. It was the face of the absolute legal owner of her entire estate. For far too long, I had avoided exercising my real power so as not to upset the fragile domestic peace, preferring to play the harmless role of the accommodating grandmother, the mother who forgives everything in silence, the widow who doesn't meddle, so she won't be a bother. I had kept the legal documents, the original deeds, and my own authority locked in a mental safe, letting them freely play lords and masters of the little empire I financed from the shadows. I walked out of the bathroom, drying my face with a rough towel. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, tinting the hospital's white walls in a melancholic orange hue. I walked back to the bed and picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't look for Matthew's number on my favorites list, nor Chloe's, nor any friend looking for comfort. I scrolled my finger down the screen until I found a very specific contact in my professional directory, one I had saved years ago under the strict name Ocean Ridge HOA, General Management and Security. At that precise moment, the heavy door of my room opened with a slight creak. It was the afternoon shift nurse, a robust woman with a kind face and observant eyes, who had been particularly attentive and professional with me throughout my stay. She walked in pushing a small metal cart with a tray containing my evening medication and a plastic cup of water. "Mrs. Newman, you know you shouldn't be up walking around the room without assistance," she warned me softly, in a tone of affectionate scolding, leaving the tray on the rolling table. "Were you finally able to reach your family? Will your son be coming first thing tomorrow morning to sign your discharge papers?" I looked her dead in the eye. My posture was perfectly straight, despite the hideous medical gown, and my voice sounded so clear and devoid of any fragility that it made her blink in surprise. "My family has decided, after careful deliberation, to prolong their vacation on the coast, Miss," my own voice replied as I walked back toward her and picked up the cup of water from the tray with a firmness I hadn't shown in 3 days. It seems my cardiac condition would irreparably ruin their well-deserved rest at the beach. The nurse immediately frowned, a mix of professional shock and genuine human outrage crossing her features. She opened her mouth to say something, probably a standard word of comfort from the patient care manual, but I raised a hand with silent authority to stop her. I didn't need her comfort, or anyone else's. I needed impeccable logistics. "I am going to require the immediate services of a top-tier private nursing agency for my transport in an appropriate vehicle and my in-home care starting first thing tomorrow morning. I will assume all costs out of my own pocket, of course, sparing no expense. Would you be so kind as to provide me with the direct contact for the hospital's social work department to arrange the hiring right now?" The nurse nodded slowly, visibly impressed by the radical transformation in my attitude and the coldness of my instructions. "Of course, Mrs. Newman. I understand perfectly. I'll go to the nurses' station and bring you the list of certified agencies right away. Do you need anything else before I go?" I looked at the black phone I held firmly in my right hand. I thought of the crisp sound of the sea through the receiver, my son's carefree laughter, and Chloe's arrogant, dismissive tone suggesting I had enough money to pay someone to care for me so as not to bother them. My daughter-in-law was absolutely right about everything in the world. I had money, and more importantly, I had the original property deed, the active power of attorney, and absolute control over the biometric access and security lists of the strictest and most exclusive gated community on the entire coast. Yes, I said, offering a millimeter-wide smile that didn't reach my eyes, just a fine, hard line drawn across my face. I need you to leave me alone for a few minutes before bringing the list. I have to make a very urgent business call to a management office. Someone in my family forgot to check who is legally listed as the exclusive owner on the access registry, and I am afraid their wonderful vacation is about to suffer a very severe structural change. The door to my room closed with a soft, metallic click, leaving me in a solitude that, for the first time in 72 hours, didn't feel like a punishment, but like a blank canvas. The constant hum of the hospital ventilation system and the rhythmic beep of my cardiac monitor became the soundtrack to my own reconstruction. I stood next to the bed, holding the cell phone with both hands, feeling the weight of the device, as if it were a judge's gavel about to hand down a sentence. My mind, trained over decades to evaluate structures, detect hidden flaws in foundations, and calculate the true value of things, had stopped processing my family through the filter of maternal indulgence. Now, I saw them with the exact same clinical coldness with which I would inspect a building about to collapse due to the negligence of its occupants. I unlocked the screen. The glass glare illuminated the lines on my hands that had signed checks, paid tuitions, funded weddings, and held up the weight of other people's irresponsibilities for far too long. I searched my contacts for the number I needed. It wasn't a relative or a compassionate friend. It was the direct line of Harrison Vance, the general manager and head of security of Times Ocean Ridge Estates. Harrison was a retired colonel, a man of unrelenting strictness and few words, whom the HOA board had hired 10 years ago to guarantee that the exclusivity and peace of the complex remained unbreakable. He and I had always understood each other perfectly. I was the only property owner who read the annual accounting balances down to the last comma, and who had never asked him for an exception to the rules. Until today, I dialed the number. The ringtone sounded barely twice before a deep, structured voice answered on the other end of the line. Ocean Ridge General Management and Security. Harrison Vance speaking. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Harrison. This is Roseanne Newman, owner of Villa 42. There was a microsecond of a pause, followed by an imperceptible shift in his tone, becoming a degree more respectful. Mrs. Newman, what a pleasure to hear from you. We didn't know you were in town. The registry indicates that your son, Mr. Matthew, entered with his family over the weekend using the courtesy keys. How can I help you? Is there a problem with the property? That is exactly why I'm calling. Harrison, I need you to confirm for me at this very moment the exact status of my guests on the premises. I heard the rapid sound of keys being struck on a keyboard on the other end of the line. Harrison didn't ask unnecessary questions. His military training made him respond to authority with precise data. The biometric system indicates that Mr. Matthew and his wife entered the beach club approximately 2 hours ago. They have an open tab at the main restaurant, charged to the credit card you left on file with management. So far, the accumulated tab is substantial. They are occupying private cabana number 6. The one with a direct view of the breakwater. I closed my eyes for an instant. The image was so vivid I could almost smell the expensive sunscreen and hear the clinking of crystal glasses. They were celebrating their impunity with my money, convinced that my unconditional love was synonymous with limitless stupidity. I understand, I said, and my voice came out with a calm that surprised even me. Harrison, I need you to pay close attention to the instructions I'm going to give you next. I want you to apply, with immediate effect and zero margin for negotiation, Clause number 7 of the HOA internal bylaws. The silence that followed was dense. Clause 7 was the most severe legal recourse Jack and I had helped draft when the community was founded. It stipulated that any guest not accompanied by the primary deed-holding owner could be expelled from the facilities immediately if the owner revoked authorization, instantly losing the right to remain inside the security perimeter. Mrs. Newman. Harrison's voice dropped in volume, adopting a tone of professional confidentiality. That clause implies the immediate deactivation of all access cards, the blocking of biometric profiles in common areas, and the intervention of security personnel to escort the individuals off the property. We are talking about your son and daughter-in-law. Are you completely certain you wish to proceed with this measure? I have never been more certain of a directive in my entire professional life. Harrison, I am informing you that I am currently hospitalized due to a cardiac event. My son and his wife were notified of my critical state and explicitly decided that my situation is a nuisance, ruining their vacation. Therefore, I have decided to relieve them of the heavy burden of enjoying my property. There was no need for further explanation. Harrison Vance was a man who detested ingratitude just as much as indiscipline. I could sense his posture straightening on the other end of the receiver. Understood. Mrs. Newman, I will proceed personally. I will deactivate the magnetic cards from the central server. As of this moment, their fingerprints will no longer open any door in the complex, including Villa 42. How do you wish us to handle the physical eviction? I want you to approach them at the restaurant. When they try to sign the check under my name, inform them that the line of credit has been cancelled by the account holder. Then, escorted by your staff, walk them back to the villa. Give them exactly 60 minutes to pack their belongings, not a minute more. If, at the stipulated time, they have not crossed the exit gate, I authorize you to call the local police for trespassing on private property. Once they are gone, change the codes on the main electronic lock. It will be executed to the letter. Ma'am, I will send you a detailed report as soon as their vehicle leaves the perimeter. Get well soon. I hung up. The process had begun, like meticulously aligned dominoes. The first piece had just fallen, and there was no force in the world capable of stopping the chain reaction. Barely 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and Emily, the afternoon nurse, walked in with the list I had requested. She handed me a blue plastic folder with an expression mixing curiosity with deep respect. Here you go, Mrs. Newman. These are the 3 private care agencies certified by the Hospital Medical Board. The first one is the most exclusive. They provide nurses specialized in intensive care and private advanced life support ambulance transport. I took the folder and read the brochures with the same concentration I applied to a real estate purchase agreement. I wasn't going to spare a single cent. The money that for years had flowed like a silent river into Matthew and Chloe's pockets would now be redirected toward the only person who truly needed and deserved it, myself. I dialed the number of the first agency. Elite Comprehensive Care. The medical coordinator answered immediately. I was direct and exhaustive with my requirements. I requested a cardiology nurse for 2-4-hour care over the next 4 weeks. Additionally, I requested a luxury medical transport vehicle, a Sprinter-style unit, equipped with monitors and ergonomic seats to pick me up the following morning. Of course, Mrs. Newman, the coordinator said, our premium service includes everything you are asking for. However, We need to know what address in the city we will be transferring you to in order to coordinate the logistics of the equipment. I will not be going to my house in the city, I replied, looking out the hospital window toward the sky, which was beginning to darken. The transfer will be to the coast, to Times Ocean Ridge Estates. The trip is 3 hours. I want the vehicle at the hospital's main entrance at exactly 9:00 a.m. The quoted cost was astronomical, the equivalent of what my daughter-in-law spent in 3 months of impulse shopping. I dictated the 16 digits of my platinum card without a tremor in my voice. The payment was approved on the spot. However, the real obstacle presented itself half an hour later when Dr. Reynolds, the cardiologist in charge of my case, walked into the room with a frown and my chart in hand. Mrs. Newman, Nurse Emily just informed me of your discharge plans. I understand you've hired an exceptional private service. But traveling 3 hours on the highway to the coast a day after a cardiac event is not what I would classify as medically prudent. I need you to stay in the city, close to a high-specialty center. He sat up in bed, adjusting my hospital gown, and looked at him with the patience of someone about to dismantle an argument with pure, irrefutable logic. Dr. Reynolds, let's evaluate the objective facts. If I return to my house in the city, I will be in a 2-story property, which will force me to go up and down stairs. I will be immersed in the noise of urban traffic, pollution, and, most critically, subjected to the emotional pressure of a family dynamic that, I assure you, is much more detrimental to my blood pressure than any highway trip. The doctor looked at me, crossing his arms, listening intently. On the contrary, I continued, if I transfer to my property on the coast, I will travel reclining in an advanced life support unit, monitored by a specialist. Upon arrival, I will be in a single-story house at sea level, where oxygenation is optimal. I will have 2 4-hour private medical care in an environment of absolute silence, clean air, and 0 stress factors. Tell me, from a strictly clinical perspective, which of the 2 scenarios offers better guarantees for my cardiac rehabilitation? Dr. Reynolds let out a small sigh, a half-smile appearing on his lips. He knew when he had lost a debate. You are a formidable woman, Mrs. Newman. Your logic is impeccable. If the agency sends me the transfer protocol in writing, and the nurse in charge signs the travel liability waiver, I will authorize your discharge tomorrow at 9 a.m. But I want daily reports of your blood pressure during the first week. You will have them on your desk every morning. Doctor, you have my word. When the doctor left the room, silence settled in again. But this time it was charged with a static, electric energy. The wall clock read 6:30 p.m. The sun had already set, plunging the city into a bluish twilight. I turned on the small reading lamp above my bed and poured myself some fresh water. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. My breathing was deep, regular. The oppressive pain in my chest had completely disappeared, replaced by an armor of cold determination. I knew exactly what was happening 110 miles away. I could visualize the scene with the same clarity as an architectural blueprint. Harrison Vance, in his impeccable uniform, approaching Chloe and Matthew's table, the waiter pulling back the payment terminal that had just declined the card. My son's initial confusion rapidly transforming into haughty indignation. Harrison's firm voice informing them they were no longer welcome guests. Chloe's panic upon seeing the security guards flanking the table. The humiliating walk back to the villa under the curious gaze of wealthy neighbors sunbathing on their terraces. The discovery that the electronic lock flashed red, denying them access to the sanctuary they took for granted. At 6:45 p.m., my phone screen, resting on the nightstand, lit up intensely. The device began to vibrate, emitting an aggressive buzz against the metal surface. The caller ID showed a name times Matthew Sell. I didn't answer immediately. I let the phone ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. I watched the screen flash, feeling how every ring was a desperate blow against the door of a fortress that had just been locked forever. When the call went to voicemail, the phone instantly rang again. They were in panic mode. The sandcastle of their privileges had just been crushed by the tide of reality. On the 4th ring of the second call, I picked up. I didn't say a single word. I let silence be my greeting. Mom. Answer. What the hell is going on? Matthew's voice came through the line, completely unhinged, high-pitched from hysteria and bewilderment. In the background, I could hear his SUV's engine running and the irritated crying of my grandson Nick. I kept my voice in a low, measured register, devoid of any emotional shrillness. Good afternoon. Matthew, what an unexpected surprise to hear your voice. I thought you were too busy, relaxing from the stress of the city to pick up the phone. Stop with the sarcasm. For God's sake, he yelled, his heavy breathing betraying his desperation. We just suffered the most horrific embarrassment of our lives. We were ordering dessert at the club, and the manager came over with 2 security guards. They told us our cards were blocked. They escorted us to the villa like we were criminals. Mom, the neighbors in Villa 30 saw us marched out, surrounded by guards. We got to the house, and the door wouldn't open. They had to use a master key, and the manager just stood in the living room watching us pack. Harrison Vance is a highly efficient professional, I commented, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle in my bedsheet. I always knew the salary the HOA pays him is fully justified. Did you do this? The disbelief in Matthew's voice was monumental. In his 35 years of life, he had never experienced a direct consequence for his actions. I had always been his safety net, his financial cushion, his perpetual excuse. Did you call management to throw us out on the street? Are you out of your mind? No. Matthew, on the contrary, I believe that for the first time in many years, I have recovered my complete mental lucidity. I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line. Chloe's voice broke in, shrill and dripping with venom. Having snatched the phone from her husband, "You are a vindictive, resentful old woman," my daughter-in-law shrieked, losing every trace of the condescending indifference she had shown hours earlier. "You are humiliating us publicly over a ridiculous whim. You have no right to treat us like this. We are your own family." Chloe, I interrupted, pronouncing her name with the same coldness. A surgeon grips a scalpel. Just a few hours ago, you informed me categorically that my medical condition threatened to ruin your well-deserved vacation. You suggested, with admirable clarity, that I use my money to solve my own problems and not bother you. I was stressed out. I didn't think you would be so twisted, she defended herself, her voice cracking from the frustration of having lost control. "And I am admitted to a cardiology unit," I replied, without raising the volume a single decibel. Since I am a woman who knows how to listen to good advice, I decided to do exactly what you asked. I hired a luxury private agency for my care, and to ensure that my existence continues to not be a logistical burden to you, I have decided to relieve you of the exhausting task of utilizing my property, spending my credit line, and sleeping on my sheets. I have freed your vacation from my shadow. You should be grateful. There was a choked silence. broken only by the child's crying in the back seat. Matthew took the phone back, his tone shifting from rage to manipulative, begging the old tactic that had always worked when he was a teenager who crashed the car or failed a semester. Mom, please, stop this madness. We already packed everything because the guards wouldn't take their eyes off us. But we are in the parking lot by the guardhouse. It's dark out. Nicholas is tired and crying because he couldn't get back into the pool. The drive back to the city at this hour is over 4 hours with heavy traffic. You can't make us drive like this. Call Vance. Tell him it was a misunderstanding and let us back in to sleep. We'll head back first thing in the morning. I swear it. He promised. I closed my eyes and visualized my son. I visualized the grown man with a well-paying job, demanding asylum in a property that didn't belong to him, using his own child as a human shield to evade responsibility for his actions. The pain that threatened to rise in my throat was instantly suffocated by the fresh memory of my own ignored plea that very morning. The rules at times, Ocean Ridge times, are extremely strict. Matthew, you, better than anyone, should know that, since you have enjoyed them for years, without a resident owner on the perimeter, guests cannot stay overnight under any circumstances. It is an insurance and civil liability issue. My instruction to management is irrevocable. We have nowhere to go at this hour, he screamed, frustration shattering his voice. You can't leave us on the street. It's your grandson. I am absolutely certain that with all the energy you saved by not coming to the hospital to care for me, you will have more than enough stamina to drive back to the city without any hiccups. And if the fatigue is excessive, you can always use the credit cards you didn't use on my medical care to pay for a nice hotel on the highway. You have options, Matthew, options that you yourselves chose. You are going to pay for this humiliation. Mom, Matthew hissed, a dark, resentful tone replacing the begging. You are going to be completely alone. No one is going to go see you at that hospital. You are going to rot alone in that room. I offered a millimeter-wide smile in the dimness of my room. The irony of his threat was almost poetic. He believed that abandonment was a punishment he was about to inflict on me, without realizing it was a reality I already inhabited, and from which I was freeing myself in that exact instant. You are wrong, Matthew. I am no longer alone. For the first time, in a long time, I have myself, and believe me, I am the best company I could have ever asked for. I suggest you start the engine. Harrison Vance does not like unauthorized vehicles blocking the exit gate. Have a safe trip. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. The screen went black, abruptly cutting off the screams, the demands, and the manipulations. I placed the device on the nightstand, in the exact same spot it had been in the morning. But the weight of the world in that room had radically changed. A few minutes later, my phone screen lit up silently with the arrival of a text message. I opened it. It was from Harrison Vance. The text was brief, tactical, and definitive. Guest's vehicle has crossed the main gate toward the freeway. Property secured. Master keys changed. Biometric codes erased from the system. At your service, Mrs. Newman. Tomorrow morning I would leave this sterile room, not as an old, disposable widow returning to an empty house in the city, but as the absolute owner of my own destiny. En route to my fortress by the sea, the storm had passed, and I was the only one left standing on the ruins, ready to build something new, and above all, impenetrable. The wall clock emitted a dull click every second, striking 8:00 a.m. with a precision that matched my own heartbeat. The morning sunlight filtered through the plastic blinds of room 402, projecting horizontal lines across the white sheets that had covered me for the past 72 hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, no longer wearing the humiliating, faded hospital gown. I was dressed in my own navy blue linen pants and a light cashmere sweater. The simple act of feeling the fabric of my own clothes against my skin acted as an anchor to reality. Handing back a fraction of the identity the clinical environment had temporarily stripped from me. The door opened smoothly, and Emily, the morning shift nurse, walked in, pushing the wheelchair mandatory for discharge protocol. Behind her walked a woman who did not belong to the hospital staff. She wore an impeccable charcoal grey uniform, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, and a posture that radiated absolute competence. She carried a compact medical bag in one hand and a digital tablet in the other. "Good morning, Mrs. Newman." The woman in grey greeted with a calm voice and perfectly modulated volume. "I am Iris, a cardiology care specialist nurse from the Elite Comprehensive Care Agency. I have reviewed your file with Dr. Reynolds, and I will be in charge of your transfer and monitoring for the next 4 weeks. The advanced life support unit is already parked at the main entrance." I nodded, evaluating her presence with the same speed I used to inspect the foundation of a commercial building. She conveyed security instantly. There was no excessive pity in her gaze, nor the condescending tone people usually use with women my age. It was pure professionalism, exactly what I was paying for. Dr. Reynolds came in a moment later to sign the final forms. He took my blood pressure one last time, checked the monitor that was about to be disconnected, and handed me a folder with my prescriptions. "Your blood pressure is remarkably stable, Mrs. Newman, more stable than yesterday. In fact," the doctor commented, raising an eyebrow with professional curiosity, "it seems the idea of moving to the coast has done wonders for your nervous system. Stress, doctor, rarely comes from geography," I replied, buttoning my sweater with unhurried movements. "It comes from misplaced expectations. I have eliminated the source of my expectations, and my heart has responded accordingly." I sat in the wheelchair without protesting, accepting the rules of the hospital game. The journey through the white hallways, the descent in the service elevator, and the exit through the automatic glass doors were a silent formality. As I crossed the building's threshold, the cold morning city air hit my face, sweeping away the last remnants of the industrial disinfectant smell. Parked in front of us in the ambulance loading zone wasn't a traditional white van, but a matte black Mercedes-Benz Sprinter, equipped with hydraulic ramps and deeply tinted windows. Iris coordinated my boarding with millimeter precision. The vehicle's interior was a marvel of medical engineering disguised as corporate luxury. There were ergonomic leather seats, a multi-parameter monitor embedded in the side panel, an oxygen dispenser hidden behind a wood compartment, and warm lighting that didn't hurt the eyes. I settled into the main seat, which reclined smoothly to find the exact angle that relieved any pressure on my chest. Iris placed a small wireless sensor on my index finger and took a seat across from me. Opening her tablet, the vehicle set off so smoothly it barely betrayed movement. As we navigated the heavy city traffic, moving away from the grey skyscrapers and nearing the freeway that connected to the coast, I closed my eyes and let the constant hum of the tires on the asphalt take me back in time. The contrast between the extreme comfort of this transport and the origin of my wealth was an abyss Matthew had never wanted to understand. I remembered the year 1995. Jack and I had driven this exact route, but not in a luxury vehicle. We were in a second-hand truck with no air conditioning. sweating under the blazing summer sun. The Times Ocean Ridge Times complex didn't exist. It was just a vast expanse of sand, coastal brush, and a natural breakwater of black rocks. We had walked over the uneven terrain with our shoes full of dirt, unrolling huge architectural blueprints over the boiling hood of our car. I had calculated the property value potential of Lot 42 with an obsessive precision. I knew the natural elevation of the land would protect it from high tides and offer an uninterrupted view of the ocean. Jack, with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his face red from the effort, had driven the first wooden stake into the sand. Matthew was 15 at the time. He had spent that entire day sitting in the back of the truck, complaining bitterly about the heat, the lack of reception on his portable radio, and why we couldn't just pay for a hotel with a pool like his friend's parents did. Jack had walked over to the car window, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, and told him a sentence that burned into my memory times. This ground you're stepping on is the foundation of your future. So, hotels are rented for a weekend, but the land holds you up for a lifetime. The irony of that memory left a metallic taste in my mouth. Matthew never learned to value the land. He only learned to demand the keys to get inside. Jack had built the estate with his own hands, and I had multiplied it with my intellect, but our son had grown up convinced that the fruits of that labor sprouted spontaneously, designed exclusively for his enjoyment and comfort. Iris's soft touch on my forearm brought me back to the present. Mrs. Newman, we are 20 minutes from the security gate at Times Ocean Ridge. Your vital signs are perfect. Would you like me to pour you some water? Or do you prefer to rest in silence until we arrive? I am perfectly awake. Iris, thank you, I said, straightening my posture and looking out the window. The landscape had changed drastically. The salty air was already filtering through the vehicle's ventilation system, and in the distance, the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean stretched out to touch the horizon. Minutes later, the unit slowed down and stopped in front of the imposing wrought iron and limestone gates that marked the entrance to the most exclusive gated community on the coast. 2 security guards in tactical uniforms approached the vehicle, but before they could ask for IDs, the door to the main guardhouse opened, and Harrison Vance stepped out. The retired colonel walked up to the driver's window with his usual firm stride. He exchanged a few brief words, then moved toward the sliding side door, which Iris opened from the inside. Harrison stopped at the threshold, taking off his security cap in a gesture of deep respect. His eyes quickly scanned the interior of the medical unit before fixing on me. Welcome home, Mrs. Roseanne. I'm glad to see you in one piece and on your feet. Thank you. Harrison, your intervention last night was impeccable. As I understand it, I replied. Holding his gaze, Harrison nodded, his expression hardening slightly, adopting the tone of an officer giving a situation report. The eviction was completed at 1-9-4-5. Mr. Matthew put up verbal resistance and threatened lawsuits, but upon seeing that community security was ready to call the local police, he agreed to leave. I personally made sure they did not take absolutely anything belonging to the property. However, I must warn you about something before you enter the villa. I frowned, my analytical mind instantly calculating possibilities, structural damage, vandalism. Speak clearly, Harrison. I am not made of glass. Despite the cardiac monitor, they didn't break anything. Ma'am, but they left the property in a state of significant disarray. They acted with the haste and negligence of people who assume someone else will clean up their tracks. I requested authorization from your phone this morning to send the deep cleaning crew, but I preferred to wait for your direct instructions. You did well. I want to see exactly how they left my house. Get in the van. Escort us to the door. The vehicle moved down the community's main avenue, flanked by perfectly aligned palm trees and lawns of an almost offensive green. We arrived at Villa 42, an imposing single-story structure designed with modern lines, massive tempered glass windows, and cedar wood finishes. The sound of the waves crashing against the natural breakwater reached my ears. The instant the vehicle doors opened, a constant reminder of nature's sovereignty and my own sovereignty over this piece of land. Iris helped me step down the hydraulic ramp. My feet touched the stone pavers of the driveway. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air. Harrison walked beside me, punched a master code into the main electronic lock, and pushed open the heavy oak door. I have erased all previous biometric prints. Mum, as soon as you are settled, we will register yours and Nurse Iris's. No one else has access to the perimeter. I crossed the threshold into my own house and stopped dead in the foyer. The smell was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't the usual scent of beeswax and lavender maintained by my housekeeper. It was a rancid mix of cheap sunscreen, stagnant humidity, and decomposing food. I moved toward the main living room, ignoring Iris's suggestion to go straight to the master bedroom to lie down. I needed to take a visual inventory. What I saw wasn't simply the result of a rushed evacuation provoked by security. It was the physical evidence of a disdain cultivated over years. The expensive raw silk cushions from the sofas were thrown on the floor, stained with damp sand and circular marks from wet glasses. On my heavy mahogany coffee table were uncapped bottles of body lotion that had spilled their oily contents onto the porous wood. I walked slowly toward the large windows facing the terrace. Several beach towels from the club's reserve, soaked and dirty, hung over the imported wicker chairs, rotting the natural weave with their salty moisture. But it was when I reached the open kitchen with its granite island that the true magnitude of their insolence became evident. The counters were covered in plastic containers of half-eaten expensive food, platters of imported seafood, aged cheeses, and charcuterie, which I had paid for with my card, were abandoned in the open air, attracting the first flies, and right in the center of the island, like a monument to insolence, rested 3 empty bottles of wine. I stepped closer, resting a hand on the cold granite to steady myself. I knew those bottles. They were from Jack's personal reserve, a Chateau Margaux 2005 that we had bought on our 30th wedding anniversary, which I had kept stored in the climate-controlled basement cellar. Waiting for a truly monumental occasion to open it, Matthew had forced the lock on the glass cellar. They had uncorked his father's legacy, not to honor his memory, but to accompany an improvised dinner in swimsuits, while I was hooked to monitors 3 hours away. They hadn't even finished the 3rd bottle. The dark liquid was oxidizing at the bottom of 2 glasses stained with bright pink lipstick. Chloe's lipstick. I did not cry. The sadness had been eradicated from my system at the hospital, burned away by indignation. What I felt was an absolute coldness, a tactical clarity that spread from my chest down to my fingertips. Harrison, I said, without taking my eyes off the empty bottles. My voice sounded so hard and sharp that Iris, standing a few feet away, instinctively took a step back. Yes. Mum, call the deep cleaning crew. I want 5 people here in 10 minutes. I want them to throw all the food in the garbage, disinfect every surface, wash the cushions, and remove all the towels, and ask the HOA administration to send me the cleaning bill with a rush surcharge. As of today, I am cancelling my voluntary contributions to the club's recreational area maintenance fund. If my family can no longer use them, I see no logical reason to continue funding the paint job on the tennis courts. Understood. Mrs. Newman. I'll handle it immediately. Harrison nodded, his face revealing deep approval of my orders. He gave a quick salute and walked out of the house. His two-way radio already in hand, I turned to Iris. Please. Iris. Set up your equipment in the ground floor guest room. I will be in my study for a few minutes. I need to review my mail and some documents before submitting to your bedrest regimen. Ma'am, my duty is to monitor you. You've had intense emotions. I will give you 15 minutes. Then I will come in to take your blood pressure and escort you to your bed. It is non-negotiable. I appreciated her firmness. It was refreshing to deal with someone who fulfilled her duties without emotional blackmail. I nodded and walked down the side hallway that led to my private study, the only space in the house that was strictly off-limits to guests. The place where I kept property deeds, tax records, and architectural blueprints. When I reached the heavy cedar door of the study, I stopped. The wooden frame around the lock had deep, recent scratches, irregular marks revealing the use of a sharp metal tool. The lock had been forced. My heart skipped a beat, not from physical exertion, but from pure adrenaline. Matthew had violated the only sanctuary I had left. I pushed the door open. It yielded with a pitiful creak. The inside of the study was dim, the curtains drawn. I turned on the bronze lamp on my desk, and the circle of yellow light revealed the disaster. The drawers of my metal filing cabinet were pried open. Dozens of manila folders with my accounting records from previous years were scattered across the hardwood floor, but what captured my attention immediately wasn't the mess, but what lay perfectly aligned in the center of my desk, as if someone had been working on it the night before. Right before Harrison's security burst in to evict them, there was a black leather binder that didn't belong to me. Embossed in gold letters was the logo for Time's Sun Coast Real Estate Partners, one of the region's most aggressive and ruthless real estate agencies. Specializing in the quick purchase of properties at liquidation prices, I sat in my leather swivel chair, ignoring the twinge of fatigue in my back, and opened the binder. My eyes, trained for 40 years to read contract, appraisals, and hidden clauses, scanned the first document. It was a commercial appraisal report for my own house. Mi villa, 42. The issue date was from 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before my heart attack. I read the numbers. As a professional property appraiser, reading it was insulting on multiple levels. The appraisal was done hastily, using exaggerated depreciation parameters. It hadn't considered the value added by the private breakwater or the recent electrical upgrades. It was an appraisal designed specifically to justify an artificially low asking price, ideal for a quick, all-cash transaction, sacrificing the true value of the estate for immediate liquidity. Beneath the appraisal was a second document. It was a legal draft abroad. General power of attorney, granting authority over litigation, collection, and property domain. The document was drafted to grant Matthew Newman absolute control over all my bank accounts, my investments, and the legal capacity to sell my properties without my direct consent. In the justification section of the POA, there was a margin note handwritten in Chloe's round. Pretentious handwriting. Cite advanced age cognitive decline to the notary. Use incidents of her forgetting keys as evidence. My hands, which had remained steady throughout the entire hospital ordeal, began to tremble slightly as I held the paper. They weren't ignoring me because they were distracted by their vacation. They were ignoring me because, in their minds, I was no longer a person with rights. I was a legal obstacle in the process of being dismantled. While I was in the ER, hooked to a monitor and begging for a signature to get discharged, they were sitting at my own desk, drinking my late husband's wine, calculating exactly how much money they would get from selling my house, and planning how to declare me mentally incompetent to take total control. I moved the POA draft aside, and the final piece of their puzzle was exposed. It was a glossy brochure, printed on high-quality paper times, Pinehaven Assisted Living, Senior Care. It was a gloomy place on the outskirts of the city, known for accepting patients on minimum pensions, an elderly dumping ground. Songwili sungwid a basic monthly fee to never see them again. That was their vision for my future. Remove me from my fortress by the sea, sell it below market price for quick cash, and lock me in a shared room under the pretext of cognitive decline. I leaned back in the chair, snapping the binder shut with a sharp thud that echoed in the empty study. The revelation didn't destroy me. It freed me from any moral obligation I might have felt toward them. A mother's unconditional love is resilient. It can withstand ingratitude, selfishness, and neglect. But what Matthew and Chloe had orchestrated wasn't neglect, it was systematic predation. They had crossed the line that separates a spoiled child from an active financial enemy. I looked at the landline phone on my desk, a direct line that didn't depend on a cellular network. My eyes swept over the documents one last time. Matthew's arrogance had a monumental blind spot. He believed power depended on youth and aggressiveness, completely forgetting that true power lies with whoever possesses technical knowledge of the game board. I had spent my entire life drafting contracts, evaluating properties, and detecting real estate fraud. Attempting to strip an expert appraiser of her own estate using a mediocre appraisal and a generic power of attorney draft was an insult to my professional intelligence. I picked up the receiver of the landline. I dialed a city number I had known by heart for 2 decades, the number for the law offices of estate attorney Arthur Sterling, the lawyer who had drafted my original will alongside Jack and our trusted executor. The phone rang 3 times before Sterling's assistant transferred me directly to his office. "Roseanne, what a miracle to hear your voice," Arthur answered in that deep, formal tone that hadn't changed in 20 years. "I heard through the grapevine you had a health scare. How are you?" My heart is functioning with a precision that would frighten any cardiologist. "Arthur, but my estate structure requires immediate surgical intervention," I said, my voice distilling an icy, methodical calm. "I need you to come to my house on the coast today. Bring your notary seal, the official trust binders, and the original documents of my estate plans." There was a pause on the line. Arthur knew my tone. He knew that, when I used that level of formality, there was no room for social courtesy. "Roseanne, it's a 3-hour drive and my schedule is packed. Can't we handle this by certified mail next week? What is so urgent?" I rested my hand on the black leather binder from Matthew, feeling the texture of the evidence under my fingers. "I have discovered that my son is preparing a fraudulent appraisal and a fake power of attorney to declare me incompetent and liquidate my assets behind my back," I said, dropping the words like blocks of lead onto the table. "We are going to beat him to the punch. We are going to establish an irrevocable blind trust. We are going to transfer the title of all liquid properties, and we are going to change the beneficiaries on my insurance policies and bank accounts. When Matthew attempts to execute his masterstroke, I want him to discover that he is trying to seize a castle that no longer exists on the map." Arthur's breathing stopped for a second. "I am cancelling my afternoon appointments. Roseanne, I'll be at Times Ocean Ridge, times at 4:00 p.m. Have your ID and account numbers ready. I hung up the phone just as the study door opened behind me. It was Iris, holding the blood pressure cuff. With a look of clinical disapproval, "Mrs. Newman, your alone time is up. I need to evaluate your vital signs and take you to rest." I stood up from the chair, leaving the binder of betrayal exactly where I had found it. I turned to the nurse, offering the first genuine and absolutely lethal smile that had crossed my face in years. "Take my blood pressure. Iris, I assure you the numbers will be fascinating. I have just initiated the controlled demolition of a family building, and believe me, I don't plan on leaving even the foundation." The blood pressure cuff inflated around my left arm with a mechanical whir, applying a firm pressure that brought me back to the present moment. Iris, the specialist nurse, kept her eyes fixed on the portable monitor's digital screen as the air slowly escaped from the valve. The study was steeped in a thick silence, barely interrupted by the distant sound of waves crashing against the breakwater and the muffled echo of the industrial vacuums Harrison Vance's cleaning crew was already using in the main living room. They were erasing any physical trace of my family's negligence with the same efficiency with which I was about to erase their financial future. 110/70. Iris announced, a professional tone tinged with genuine disbelief. "Mrs. Newman, considering that less than 24 hours ago you were connected to an IV in the ER, and that you just discovered your own house was broken into and vandalized, this reading is medically fascinating. Your heart rate is that of a woman who just woke up from a deep, restful sleep, not that of a patient in coronary recovery." I withdrew my arm and adjusted the sleeve of my cashmere sweater with slow, deliberate movements. "Stress, Iris, is the direct result of uncertainty," I explained, my voice sounding as flat and structured as the marble floor beneath our feet. "For years, my heart has been subjected to the constant pressure of trying to hold up a family structure that was rotten from the foundation. I exhausted myself trying to justify my son's indifference, funding his lifestyle, and hoping for a reciprocity that was never going to arrive. What you are measuring now is not a medical anomaly. It is the absolute relief of someone who has finally decided to stop holding up a collapsing roof. Clarity is a wonderful anti-hypertensive." Iris nodded slowly, packing the medical equipment into her charcoal grey bag. "Even so, my duty is to require you to rest. The master bedroom has already been sanitized and prepped by the cleaning crew. I suggest you lie down for at least a couple of hours before your legal counsel arrives. I will be in the guest room monitoring the central vital signs station. If you need me, you only have to press the intercom button." I accepted her instruction without protest. I walked down the hallway of my own home, feeling the atmosphere transform around me. The smell of rancid sunscreen, decomposing seafood, and spilled wine had been completely eradicated, replaced by the sterile, comforting scent of citrus cleaners and wood wax. Upon entering my bedroom, I found the Egyptian cotton sheets perfectly stretched, the sheer curtains allowing the golden midday light to pass through, and the air conditioning programmed to the exact temperature I preferred. I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes, and instead of sleeping, allowed my analytical mind to do what it did best, an exhaustive, ruthless inventory of my estate. I visualized every deed, every bank account, every insurance policy. Jack and I had built a discreet but formidable empire. There was the city house, a 2-story property in a high-value residential neighborhood. There was this fortress on the coast, Villa 42 at Times Ocean Ridge, whose real market value tripled the ridiculous figure Matthew's corrupt appraiser had printed in that black binder. There were the conservative mutual funds, generating more than enough monthly dividends to cover my medical and maintenance expenses. And then there was the apartment at Times Parkview Towers. I opened my eyes and stared at the immaculate ceiling. The apartment at Times Parkview Towers Times was the key piece, the elephant in the room that Matthew had chosen to ignore in his equation of arrogance. When he and Chloe married 10 years ago, they demanded a place befitting their new social status. I paid the entire down payment and, month by month, paid off the mortgage under the pretext that they needed to save for their son's future. What Matthew had conveniently forgotten, blinded by his own greed and superiority complex, was that the property deed for that luxurious 3-bedroom apartment overlooking the Central Park had never been transferred to his name. I was listed as the sole legal owner in the public registry. They simply lived there, enjoying a free ride, a charity disguised as a wedding gift that I never legally formalized because my appraiser's instinct, that silent voice that detects risk before it materializes, had warned me not to hand over the final key to my security. At exactly 4:00 p.m., the front doorbell echoed throughout the house. I got up, splashed my face with water in the bathroom, and walked toward the study. Iris had already opened the door and guided Arthur Sterling to my cedar-paneled sanctuary. The estate attorney was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. He carried a heavy, worn leather briefcase containing official seals and trust documents. His face, usually serene and diplomatic, showed evident tension upon seeing the forced lock on my study and the partial mess I had ordered untouched until he saw it with his own eyes. "Roseanne," Arthur greeted, stepping forward to kiss my cheek with a respect that bordered on reverence. "When you called me this morning, I thought you were exaggerating under the influence of medication. But seeing this door and reading the documents you left on the desk while I waited, I realized the situation is infinitely darker than I imagined." I sat in my swivel chair, gesturing for him to sit across from me. Iris remained standing by the door. Like a silent sentinel dressed in grey, there is no exaggeration in the numbers, Arthur, nor in their documented intentions, I said, pointing to the black binder from Times Suncoast Real Estate Partners Times still resting on the desk. My son and his wife planned to use my hospitalization to initiate an incompetency proceeding. They intended to declare me as having cognitive decline, use my minor forgetfulness with keys as clinical evidence, sell this very house at a fire sale price to obtain immediate liquidity, and confine me to a low-budget nursing home. All of this while they drank my late husband's wine in my own kitchen and refused to answer my calls from the coronary unit. Arthur shook his head in dismay. Flipping through the draft of the power of attorney Matthew had prepared, "This document is crude, Roseanne. It's a generic template downloaded from the internet or drafted by a fifth-rate lawyer. But with a fake medical evaluation and a sympathetic judge, it could have caused you a legal hell that would have taken years to unravel. Your son underestimated your capacity to react, but not his own malice. What are your instructions for me? You know I am entirely at your disposal." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood surface. My mind was cold. Operating with the precision of a Swiss watch, "We are going to establish an irrevocable blind trust today. Arthur, I want the absolute title of all my real estate properties, including the city house, this coastal villa, and the apartment at Times Parkview Towers, Times where Matthew and Chloe currently reside, transferred immediately to the trust. The trustee will be the Wealth Management Division of the Central Bank. I will be the sole lifetime beneficiary of the yields. but I will cede legal control and the capacity to sell to the banking institution. Arthur's eyes widened, and he dropped the pen he was holding. He understood perfectly the implications of what I was asking. Roseanne, an irrevocable trust means exactly that. There is no going back. You are divesting yourself of the legal ownership of your own assets. You are removing your entire estate from the inheritance pool. When you pass away, Matthew will inherit no properties, because, legally, you will no longer own any. It will depend on the clauses we establish today. That is exactly the objective. Arthur, I replied, my voice without the slightest tremor. A man who tries to sell the lifeboat while his mother is drowning does not deserve to inherit the ship. The posthumous clauses will stipulate that the real estate will be liquidated by the bank, and the funds will be donated entirely to the Central General Hospital Foundation, specifically to the cardiology ward that saved my life while my family sunbathed. Matthew will not receive a single cent, not a single brick, nor a single bank account. Arthur nodded, his legal mind processing the devastating elegance of the strategy. It is a masterstroke. Roseanne, if Matthew attempts to file for guardianship to declare you incompetent and assume control of your assets, he will find there are no assets to control. You can't manage or sell what no longer belongs to you. The trust is a reinforced concrete wall between him and your money. But there is a weak flank we must cover, immediately alleged mental incompetence at the moment of signing. I finished his sentence, proving I had already calculated that variable. Matthew will argue that I signed these documents today under the influence of coerced medication or in the midst of senile delirium brought on by the heart attack. He will say the trust is null because I was not in my right mind. I swiveled my chair toward the door, where Iris observed the interaction with impeccable posture. That is why Nurse Iris is not here just to take my blood pressure. Iris is a certified healthcare professional, employed by a prestigious external medical agency, with no prior personal or financial ties to me. Iris, I need to know if you are willing to act as an eyewitness and medical expert for this legal act. Iris took a step forward, her face reflecting absolute comprehension of the situation. Mrs. Newman, my professional license authorizes me to issue a certificate of alertness and cognitive orientation. I can testify under oath and leave written documentation attached to the attorney's trust binder that you are oriented in time, space, and person, with a perfect score on the Glasgow scale, unimpaired by drugs, and with a mental lucidity that many of my younger patients would wish for. It will be an honor to sign that document. Arthur smiled for the first time all afternoon, a sharp, professional smile. He opened his heavy briefcase and pulled out the official folios printed on security paper. For the next 2 hours, the study became a legal operating room. We reviewed every clause, every account number, every property folio. I signed over 40 pages, stamping my signature and thumbprint next to the attorney's notary seals. Iris completed an exhaustive medical report detailing my perfect neurological and cognitive state at the exact minute of signing, attaching it like an impenetrable shield to the trust's constitutional deed. When Arthur finally closed the protocol book, the sun was already setting over the ocean, bathing the room in a coppery light. The process is complete, Roseanne, the attorney said, packing the documents with utmost care. First thing tomorrow morning, I will file the paperwork with the Public Property Registry. From that moment on, the central bank is the legal owner of everything, and you are its untouchable ward. Your son is legally disarmed. That night, I slept with a depth I hadn't experienced in years. There were no nightmares about hospitals or anxiety over family disdain, just the rhythmic sound of the sea and the absolute certainty that the natural order of things had been restored. The following morning, the coastal breeze blew through the terrace windows, while I enjoyed a light breakfast prepared by Iris. I was dressed in a white linen ensemble and drank my chamomile tea, watching the seagulls trace circles over the breakwater. The peace was almost tangible, but as an experienced appraiser, I knew the market always reacts to value adjustments, and the reaction did not take long to arrive. At 7 Himblas AM, the terrace intercom emitted a sharp buzz. I pressed the silver button. Mrs. Newman. This is Harrison from the main security gate. The colonel's voice sounded tense. Stripped of his usual protocolary calm, we have a situation at Access 1. Your son, Mr. Matthew, is here. He is not alone. He is accompanied by 2 individuals identifying themselves as his legal representation, and a 4th subject, claiming to be a psychiatric emergency evaluator. They are demanding immediate access to Villa 42. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth of the liquid travel down my throat. The trap had closed exactly as I had anticipated. Matthew, desperate over the previous night's eviction and terrified at the prospect of losing his gold mine, had decided to move forward with his incompetency plan. He believed he could take the fortress by storm, using legal and medical intimidation. Under what argument are they demanding entry? Harrison, I asked, my calm voice echoing through the speaker. The lawyer accompanying him presented a preliminary document. They claim you were taken from Central General Hospital against your cardiologist's orders, that you are suffering from an acute episode of senile dementia, and that you have been kidnapped or manipulated by the private nursing agency. Mr. Matthew demands to see you to perform an times in situ, times psychiatric evaluation, and assume provisional guardianship of your assets. They are threatening to bring in law enforcement if we deny them access to the community. I smiled. My son's arrogance was truly a spectacle worthy of study. He was using my own resources, the privacy and security of the gated community I funded, as a weapon against me. Harrison, listen carefully. Under no circumstances will they be allowed past the guardhouse. They will not step foot on the community streets. Put them in the small glass conference room you have in the administration building at the entrance. Offer them coffee if you'd like. I will be heading there in 5 minutes. Are you sure? Ma'am, I can send them packing right now with my guards. You don't have to subject yourself to this confrontation. It's not a confrontation. Harrison, it's an eviction notice from reality. Prep the room. I stood up from the wicker chair. Iris, who had heard the entire conversation from the kitchen, was already by my side with the portable monitor in her hand. I do not approve of this from a medical standpoint. Mrs. Newman, your blood pressure could spike. My blood pressure is protected by an irrevocable trust. Iris, come with me. I will need my trusted medical expert to say hello to my son's rent-a-psychiatrist. Harrison sent his modified security golf cart to pick us up. The ride down the palm-lined avenues was brief. As we approached the imposing entrance arch of Times Ocean Ridge, I could see Matthew's luxury SUV parked aggressively, blocking one of the visitor lanes. The security administration building was a structure of glass and steel. I walked in on my own 2 feet, flanked by Iris, with a posture so straight it defied any diagnosis of weakness. In the conference room, Matthew was pacing like a caged animal. Beside him stood Chloe, arms crossed, feigning a concern that didn't reach her eyes. Sitting at the table were a young man in a cheap suit, sweating profusely, and an older man with a briefcase, the supposed psychiatrist. When I opened the door, the room plunged into a dead silence. Matthew stopped in his tracks. He had expected to find a fragile, confused old woman, perhaps in a wheelchair, easy to intimidate in the presence of authority figures. Instead, he met the exact same ruthless appraiser who, for 40 years, had destroyed sales pitches with a single glance. Mom Matthew took a step forward, adopting a sickly sweet, condescending tone of voice, the same one he used when he wanted to ask for a loan he didn't intend to repay. "Thank God you're okay. We were terrified. You left the hospital without telling us. We had to bring professional help because we know you aren't thinking clearly due to your condition. We just want to protect you." I stopped in the center of the room. I did not sit down. I did not offer him a smile. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds, forcing them to bear the weight of my scrutiny. "It is fascinating, Matthew, the speed with which you went from being too busy drinking margaritas at the beach club to leading a psychiatric rescue intervention in less than 24 hours. I said, using a clinical tone stripped of any maternal emotion. "Chloe, darling, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought my presence threatened to ruin your vacation. Do you no longer care about losing your sunny days?" Chloe tensed, her face flushing beneath her perfect makeup. "We are here for your well-being. Mrs. Roseanne, you need constant supervision in a proper facility. Not to be alone in such a big house. You know how you get sometimes with your old age ailments." I returned her own words with lethal precision, using the exact phrase she had used to dismiss me over the phone. "My old age ailments. Chloe, my cognitive decline. That is the concept you plan to use." "Right." My gaze drifted to the sweating young lawyer. "I assume this gentleman is in charge of filing the incompetency motion based on the evaluations of this doctor, who has never in his life taken my pulse. And I assume that inside your lawyer's briefcase, Matthew, is the contract with Time's Suncoast Real Estate Partners, Time's to liquidate my villa for a fraction of its value." Matthew paled instantly. The color drained from his face as if his circulation had been cut off. He took a step back, stumbling slightly against the leg of a chair. What are you talking about?" "Mom, you're delirious. Doctor, please." Make a note of her paranoia. It's a clear symptom of— I raised a hand, stopping his pathetic monologue with a gesture that admitted no reply. Iris, perfectly synchronized, pulled a certified copy of the medical report, issued the previous afternoon from her briefcase, and slid it across the glass table. Right in front of the supposed psychiatrist, that document, Sir, I addressed the doctor paid by my son, is a comprehensive neurological and cognitive expert report, signed by a certified specialist, notarized, and sealed less than 18 hours ago. It proves that my mental lucidity is absolute and irrefutable. If you attempt to issue a dementia diagnosis without having evaluated me, based on my son's lies, I will personally ensure the state medical board revokes your license for fraud and conspiracy before Friday. I suggest you grab your briefcase and leave these premises immediately." The psychiatrist looked at the official document, saw the notary seals and the elite agency's letterhead, and swallowed hard. He grabbed his briefcase without saying a single word and walked quickly out of the glass room, abandoning Matthew to his fate. The young lawyer followed him a second later, muttering something unintelligible about conflicts of interest. Matthew and Chloe were left alone in front of me, stripped of their cardboard legal shield. The farce had collapsed, but the real lesson was just about to begin. "Mom, we just wanted to manage things so you could rest." Misson stammered, trying to cling to the remnants of his plan. "The house is too big. The upkeep is expensive. As your heir, I have the right to protect the estate. I let out a short, dry laugh, devoid of any humor. The sound echoed off the glass walls. You told me on the phone, Chloe, with admirable clarity, that I should use my own money to solve my problems and hire whoever I needed to care for me. It was brilliant financial advice, so I followed it to the letter. I paid for the best medical care available, and then I used my money to hire the best estate attorney in the city. I pulled the certified copy of the trust deed from my handbag and dropped it onto the glass table with a sharp thud. I have just established an irrevocable blind trust. Matthew, yesterday afternoon, I transferred absolute title of the city house, this villa, my investment accounts, and all my assets to the central bank. I am no longer the legal owner of any of it. Therefore, you cannot declare me incompetent to manage assets I no longer manage. You cannot inherit properties that are no longer in my name. And most importantly, you cannot sell a house that now belongs to a financial institution. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the structure of their reality fracturing in real time. Matthew's eyes widened in horror, scanning the pages of the notarized document, searching for a logical loophole that did not exist. Chloe brought a hand to her mouth, finally understanding that the goose that laid the golden eggs hadn't just stopped laying it, had armored itself in an impenetrable fortress. You left us with nothing, Matthew whispered, his voice cracking no longer from pretense, but from genuine terror. You disinherited me. Your own son. No. Matthew, I protected myself from my own predator. There is a fundamental difference. You made the decision that I was disposable when my heart failed. I made the decision to ensure your financial expectations were disposable. 2. I turned around, ready to leave the room. The victory was total, cold, and analytical. However, I paused at the threshold of the glass door and looked over my shoulder at the petrified couple. The symmetry of justice required one final structural adjustment, a detail I had deliberately saved for last. By the way, Matthew, I said, my tone reflecting an almost casual curiosity, there is a small administrative detail I forgot to mention about the trust. As you may remember, I paid for the apartment at times, Parkview Towers times where you live, but the title was always in my name. Now it belongs to the central bank. Chloe let out a small, strangled whimper. The bank trustee has strict instructions to maximize the estate's yields. I continued, watching absolute panic take over their faces. This very morning, the bank issued a formal rent collection notice at current market value, retroactive for the last 3 months, plus the corresponding security deposit. I am afraid that if you do not make the transfer to the trust's account by 5:00 p.m. today, the bank's legal department will initiate the automatic eviction process first thing tomorrow morning. I left the sentence floating in the room's air conditioning. Heavy and immovable as a concrete slab. I suggest you head back to the city quickly, I added with the icy courtesy of a stranger. Traffic on the freeway can be treacherous at this hour, and you wouldn't want to ruin the rest of your week packing your furniture in the dark. Have an excellent day. I walked out of the glass conference room without looking back, letting the door close slowly behind me with a pneumatic hiss that definitively sealed shut 40 years of unilateral concessions. The midday sun beat down heavily on the impeccable pavement of the guardhouse parking lot, but the breeze from the Pacific Ocean, loaded with salt and an unbreakable freshness, mitigated any sensation of suffocation. I walked toward the modified golf cart where Harrison Vance waited for me with the engine running. My steps on the concrete were firm, measured, lacking the urgency or tremor one would expect from a 7-2-year-old woman recently discharged from a coronary unit, Iris, walking beside me with her charcoal grey bag gripped in her right hand, did not attempt to hold me by the elbow or offer unnecessary words of comfort. Her professional silence was the greatest tribute to my recovered autonomy. I settled into the white leather seat of the electric vehicle. Harrison didn't ask questions about what happened inside the administration building. His military training had taught him to read the outcome of a battle simply by observing the posture of the commanders as they left the front lines. He accelerated smoothly, and as we moved away toward the main avenue, flanked by imperial palms, the unmistakable sound of an 8-cylinder engine roared behind us. I turned my head barely a millimeter. It was Matthew's luxury SUV, backing up with erratic abruptness, slightly hitting the curb before speeding toward the federal highway. They were fleeing with the desperation of people who had just realized that the legal labyrinth in which they tried to lock me not only had no exit, but the walls were rapidly closing in on them. Upon arriving at Villa 42, the atmosphere inside my home had changed drastically. Management's cleaning crew had finished their job. Not a single physical trace of my family's hasty invasion remained. The raw silk cushions were clean and perfectly aligned on the sofas. The granite kitchen surfaces gleamed free of wine stains, and the air smelled exclusively of beeswax, Leonda, and the clean moisture blowing in from the breakwater. I sank into my favorite reading chair, a sturdy piece upholstered in linen that faced directly toward the blue horizon. Iris approached immediately, pulling the blood pressure cuff from her bag with precise movements. The hum of the cuff inflating around my arm was the only sound in the room for several seconds. 115/75. Mrs. Newman, the nurse reported, reading the digital screen with an expression of absolute clinical fascination. Your heart rate is 68 beats per minute. After the direct confrontation you just had, and considering your history from 3 days ago, these numbers defy standard medical literature. Your cardiovascular system is not registering stress, it is registering relief. I told you this morning. Iris, I replied, unfastening the Velcro cuff and pulling down the sleeve of my cashmere sweater. True stress doesn't come from frontal conflict. It comes from the anticipation of harm. For years I lived waiting for the next disappointment, the next snub, the next bill I had to pay to buy a fictional family peace. Now that the building has been demolished to its foundation and the lot is cleared, my heart no longer has to struggle to hold up ruinous structures. The days that followed that morning became a meticulous exercise in personal and financial reconstruction. The routine established itself with a comforting cadence. I woke up at 6:00 a.m. without the need for alarms, accompanied only by the sound of waves crashing against the volcanic rocks of my backyard. Iris prepared strict but delicious breakfasts, low in sodium and rich in antioxidants, which we consumed on the terrace under the rising sunlight. Then we took progressive walks on the compact sand of the private beach. At first, I walked only 10 minutes before feeling slight fatigue in my chest. But my discipline, the same discipline that had allowed me to triumph in the cutthroat world of real estate, was applied to my own anatomy. By the end of the first week, I could walk for 30 continuous minutes without my breathing losing its rhythm. It was precisely on the afternoon of the 8th day, while I was reviewing catalogs from an interior design house to order new patio furniture, when the landline phone in my study rang sharply. I walked to the cedar room whose splintered frame had already been repaired and reinforced by a local carpenter sent by Harrison, and picked up the receiver. It was Arthur Sterling, my attorney and executor, calling from the city. His voice, usually restrained and protocolary, distilled an undeniable tinge of professional astonishment and satisfaction today. Roseanne, I just got out of a meeting with the central bank's trust department. Arthur began without preamble. The corporate gears we set in motion have functioned with an efficiency that is almost poetic. I wanted to give you the exact status report, just as you requested. I'm listening. Arthur, don't leave out any procedural details. You know I've always enjoyed a good audit. I heard the sound of paper flipping on the other end of the line. First thing Tuesday morning. The bank took legal and administrative possession of the apartment at Times Parkview Towers. Robert Vaughan, the head of the trust's asset recovery division, showed up at the residence personally, accompanied by a notary actuary to deliver the collection notice. Matthew tried to use the power of attorney he drafted himself, arguing that he was your legal representative. I assume Mr. Vaughan wasn't impressed by a document with no official seals, I commented, leaning back in my swivel chair, observing my desk's immaculate surface. Vaughan didn't even have to argue. Arthur continued with a dry tone of irony. He simply pulled out his tablet, accessed the public registry in real time, and proved to your son that the properties were no longer in your name. Matthew's power of attorney, even if it had been certified, was wet paper. You cannot manage on behalf of a title holder who no longer possesses the assets. When Matthew refused to pay the retroactive rent set at commercial market value, the bank activated the express eviction clause for irregular occupation of a trust property. I remained silent, allowing the information to settle in my mind. I didn't feel pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of a mathematical equation finally balancing perfectly. The eviction was executed yesterday morning. Roseanne, the attorney proceeded, lowering his voice slightly. It was a strictly legal procedure, but given the nature of the building, inevitably public, the bank hired a standard moving company. No special packaging or white gloves, just basic corrugated cardboard boxes. The movers emptied the apartment in less than 4 hours. According to what Vaughan told me, Chloe had a hysterical fit in the building's main lobby. She demanded to speak to the condo manager, threatened lawsuits for emotional distress, and screamed that it was all a temporary misunderstanding. The manager at Times, Parkview Towers Times, is a very strict man when it comes to protocol, I noted, remembering the building's stuffy administrator. He detests scenes in the lobby. Exactly. Building security asked them to step out onto the sidewalk. Several residents, people Chloe used to play tennis with and organize charity dinners for to flaunt her supposed status, witnessed the entire scene from the glass elevators. The social reputation your daughter-in-law built using your checkbook evaporated. The instant the movers dropped her designer suitcases onto the public curb, they had to rent a last-minute moving truck and move their belongings into a temporary storage unit on the outskirts of the city. Currently, they are renting a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a peripheral sector, very far from private parks and beach clubs. Decisions have a market cost. Arthur, they miscalculated the value of their own arrogance. What about the liquid accounts and investment funds? Everything is secured in the trust's vault. The bank has already begun generating the first dividends under the new instructions. Yesterday, the first electronic transfer was made to the Central General Hospital Foundation's account. The director of the cardiology ward sent me a formal letter of gratitude. With your first contribution, they are going to upgrade 3 intensive care monitoring units, the same machines that kept an eye on you while you were alone. It's an excellent investment. Make sure the bank maintains a steady monthly flow. And Arthur, thank you for your impeccable execution. My estate is finally working for those who value life, and not for those patiently awaiting my death. I hung up the call and stared at the black telephone. The symmetry of events was perfect. Matthew and Chloe had planned to send me to a peripheral nursing home and sell my house to fund their luxuries. Instead, they had ended up in a peripheral neighborhood, and my estate was funding the health of hundreds of strangers. There was no vengeance in my heart, only a profound and definitive structural readjustment. The weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of time's Ocean Ridge times absorbed me completely. Exactly 30 days after my arrival, Iris's contract came to an end. The morning of her departure, the specialist nurse packed her medical bag with the same dispassionate efficiency with which she had arrived. I walked her to the front door, where a vehicle from the agency waited for her. "Mrs. Newman, your clinical file is closed with an excellence rating," Iris said, pausing at the threshold and offering me a genuine smile, devoid of professional stiffness. "Your blood pressure is that of a resting athlete, and your heart shows no lingering effects from the ischemic event. It has been an absolute privilege observing your process. You didn't just heal your cardiac muscle, you excised the tumor that was suffocating it. The privilege has been mine. Iris, you taught me that the best medical assistance is sometimes simply someone who stands firm while you make the difficult decisions. You have a special bonus deposited in your personal account, courtesy of a woman who knows how to appraise the true value of impeccable work." We shook hands firmly, a gesture of mutual respect between two women who understood the language of concrete facts over empty words, and I watched her drive away down the palm-lined avenue that same afternoon. I began the final phase of my physical purge in Villa 42. I hired a crew of trusted local workers, supervised by the relentless Harrison Vance, to completely remodel the guest room that Matthew and Chloe used to claim as theirs. I was not going to allow that space to continue functioning as a monument to parasitism. I ordered them to dismantle the enormous oak king bed, tear up the orthopedic mattresses they had demanded I buy, and rip down the heavy blackout curtains Chloe used to sleep until noon. The workers carried the furniture out to the street and loaded it onto a junk collection truck instead of a room for guests who were never going to arrive. I transformed the space into a private library and cardiovascular rehabilitation room. I installed cherry wood bookshelves from floor to ceiling, where I arranged my collections of architecture, history, and real estate appraisal books that had been gathering dust in boxes. I placed a state-of-the-art treadmill facing the windows that looked out onto the side garden, and a leather recliner for my afternoons of reading. I changed the wall color from a sterile white to a warm sand tone, forever erasing the visual footprint of the former occupants. The silence that now reigned in my house was not a painful void. It was an expansive silence, an auditory luxury only achieved when you eliminate the noise of constant ingratitude. 6 months after my hospitalization at Central General, the weather on the coast began to change, announcing the arrival of winter, with colder breezes and skies painted a pearly gray. My routine had solidified into an existence of absolute peace. I never received calls from Matthew again. Harrison Vance, always efficient, had informed me a couple of months prior that my son had tried to show up at the main Times Ocean Ridge Times guardhouse on 2 occasions, claiming family emergencies, both times following my strict protocols. The security guards had denied him access without even consulting me on the intercom, forcing him to turn around in the exterior roundabout under the watchful eye of the surveillance cameras. The concrete wall Arthur Sterling and I had erected was impenetrable, both legally and physically. One Tuesday morning, the community's courier service left a thick manila envelope in my mailbox. I took it to my study, sat in my swivel chair, and turned on the bronze lamp. The sender was the central bank's trust department. I opened the envelope with a silver letter opener. Inside was a detailed, semi-annual account statement. Printed on high-security letterhead paper, I read the columns of numbers with the same fascination I used to feel reading the appreciation statements of my best investments. The trust operated with surgical precision. The yields from the index funds had outpaced inflation. The new tenant of the Times, Parkview Towers, Times apartment. A foreign executive, the bank had carefully selected, paid his rent with Swiss punctuality directly into the concentration account. In the expenses section, the figures reflected my medical costs, the premium maintenance of Villa 42, and the philanthropic transfers. Attached to the account statement was a small white envelope bearing the logo of Central General Hospital. It contained a photograph printed on glossy photo paper and a brief, handwritten note. The image showed the newly inaugurated Jack Newman Coronary Recovery Ward, named in honor of my late husband at the Trust's request. In the photo were 5 state-of-the-art adjustable beds, flanked by multi-parameter monitors identical to the ones that had measured my own erratic heartbeats during those 3 days of abandonment. The note, signed by the medical director, simply read, "Thanks to your structural vision, Mrs. Newman, 50 patients a month will be able to recover with the dignity and technology they deserve. Your estate is saving lives every day." I folded the note and stored it, along with the account statement, in the top drawer of my desk, the exact same drawer where Matthew had tried to search for my deeds to strip me of everything. I locked the drawer, feeling the metallic click of the security mechanism. Justice doesn't always require screaming, or theatrical revenge, or endless confrontations. Sometimes the purest form of justice is the simple and plain redistribution of capital toward places where it produces real value. Letting financial drought wither the opportunists, I got up from the desk and walked to the kitchen. The wall clock read 5:00 p.m. The exact hour. The sky began to tint in copper and purple hues over the Pacific horizon. I opened the frosted glass pantry and took out my favorite artisanal ceramic mug. I heated filtered water and steeped my chamomile tea. Watching the dried flowers release their golden color into the boiling liquid, there was no rush. There was no phone ringing with demands for money. No ill-mannered grandson breaking ornaments in the living room. No daughter-in-law complaining about the cleaning service. There was only the constant murmur of nature reclaiming its space. I took the steaming mug between my hands and walked out to the exterior terrace. The cold evening wind rustled my silver hair, but the cashmere sweater kept me perfectly warm. I walked down the 3 treated wood steps that connected my terrace to the private sand, and walked at a slow but firm pace toward the volcanic breakwater that bordered my property. I sat on the largest, flattest rock, a black, porous stone that retained the heat of the daytime sun. To my right, the infinite ocean stretched out majestically, crashing its waves against the natural barriers with a rhythmic, unbreakable force. To my left, Villa 42 stood solid, illuminated from the inside by warm lights that highlighted its modern lines and impeccable art. It was my fortress, my sanctuary, the epicenter of my recovered sovereignty. I rested the mug on the rough surface of the stone and slid my right hand into the pocket of my linen pants. My fingers brushed against a small, hard plastic rectangle. I pulled it out and held it in front of me, letting the twilight reflect off its surface. It was my new biometric access card, issued by the Times Ocean Ridge Times Administration. At the bottom, printed in crisp black letters, It did not say Times, primary deed owner, Times as it used to. It now read Lifetime Trust Beneficiary and Exclusive Resident. I owned nothing on paper. But I was the absolute owner of my peace, my time, and my space. I had relinquished legal ownership to secure intellectual property over my own destiny. I looked toward the beach, remembering for a fraction of a second the afternoon my daughter-in-law had answered the phone from this exact beach club, complaining that my failing heart threatened to ruin her vacation. I smiled, a tiny, private smile that needed no spectators or witnesses to be real. They had believed that an older woman's value lay solely in her capacity to sign checks and disappear into the background of the family scenery. They had underestimated an appraiser's capacity to evaluate risk, calculate losses, and execute a total liquidation of toxic assets. I brought the tea mug to my lips and took a slow sip. The liquid went down my throat, comforting and warm. With my free hand, I checked the pulse on my left wrist, 70 beats per minute. Strong, constant, unalterable. The sea roared in front of me, kicking up a salty mist that dissipated into the perfect evening air. I was exactly where I belonged, anchored to the foundation I had saved myself, and the silence surrounding me was the most beautiful melody my money could ever buy.